Well, thank you, Ed, for sharing your story. It's actually quite interesting. Your story and mine have some good parallels in it. I do data also, so it is something that we do see a fair number of autistic individuals that tend to flourish in the data arena. But one thing I don't want people to mistake is autistic people don't do only tech. You can find autistic individuals in virtually any career field. We just happen to have a lot of us in the tech world. You'd mentioned also that you were diagnosed as an adult, and I also am a adult diagnosed person with autism, which gave us the advantage of living life thinking that we're normal and not understanding why it works. And then once we get our diagnosis, suddenly things fall into place. You'd mentioned eye contact as being one of the challenges, and that's something I think a lot of people don't understand is the communication styles and methods of people who are autistic. Now, obviously, everybody's an individual, and everybody can vary, but the inability to maintain eye contact is something that is fairly normal. And it's actually related to brain processing. And it's interesting, we can get almost anybody to break eye contact by just giving them a hard enough thing to answer kind of out of sequence, and they'll be looking all over for the answer. There you just think that they're thinking about it. For some reason, when we're autistic, they think that we're not interested, we're lying, we're doing something like that, when it's merely we're trying to give as much processing power as possible to say what is really on our mind and get it communicated. Another thing that goes along with that communication challenge is it's quite common for individuals that are autistic to have very, very flat affect when they speak. And what that means is that they're not putting a lot of emotion coming across. Tends to be fairly monotone, tends to have not a lot of emotion showing in the face and the body movement. And that also throws people off. If you think about it, if somebody's not looking at you and they're sounding like they're disconnected from you, you don't think that they're interested. You don't think they're involved. But the reality is we can be just involved as anybody without having to look at you. And that's just the way our brains tend to process. Another thing you had brought up that is something that a lot of people don't think of with autism is the sensory processing disorder, which you mentioned as being when you're in the office, the noisy rooms and such, as being very challenging to concentrate and do your work. But sensory processing disorder is actually interesting in that, it's not just the noise, it could be the smell. It could be the fish somebody just cooked in the little micro kitchen around the corner that you just can't stand being in the room with. It also could be light. It could be, vision and lights and blinking and such. But what's interesting about sensory processing disorders, while it's very common in autism, 80% of people who have sensory processing are not autistic. So these things apply to the general community of just think about all those disturbances. You got into your special interests, and I think special interests are something that are too misunderstood in autism. And the reason I say they're too misunderstood is the definition of special interest is something where it's either a deeper or obscure compared to what most people would find as an interest and spend time on. And oftentimes people will look at what our special interest is, and then they will go and think that we're a little strange or a little wacky because of whatever it is. Maybe it's I have a friend in the UK, and when he was young, his special interest was lining his cars up. Also, they looked just perfect on the windowsill. But what did he end up doing? He ended up going into a career field where ordering and lining things up and putting them in the correct order was very helpful. I found myself, like you said, you're very interested and enjoy what you're doing. And I found that interest in those things, whether it's data, whether it's whatever, always have led me to a career. And that's something that's important, I think, particularly for parents to understand that have autistic children, is it doesn't matter if your kid's autistic interest is a little different than what you might be interested in, as long as it's safe and not harmful, of course. You want to really take and foster that and encourage that, because that is going to be how they are going to develop into developing a skill base that likely will become a career or something that's very tied to their career in the future. So special interests is definitely are a real key. And if you're a manager and have an autistic person, and you can understand what the person's special interest is and assign them something that is, parallel with it, you will end up with just an amazing employee. So special interests are definitely a really, key area. Drive for perfection is kind of another thing that goes into a special interest. If you're really interested in something, you tend to want to do a great job at it. And as you said, you've gotten into it, you really enjoy it to the point that you've done a huge amount of training and mentoring of other people because you've pushed yourself so far into that, trying to be perfect in the career you do. And that's something that also is very common for autistic individuals, to have that striving for perfection. And I personally think it comes from a basis of, through most of our lives, we've been told we don't do things the right way. Why can't you do it the right way? Why can't you say that the right way? And because of that, through childhood on through, we become very aware of trying to do the correct and proper thing as desired. And often that means that we will do the work to a finer or further degree than is necessary. So that's another little key for somebody managing an autistic person, is give them guidance on, I need this much done. I need half a day's work on this. You don't need to put a week into this thing. Give them some guidelines, some guidance of what you want, so they do the appropriate level of work and don't go and spend lots of time going beyond what the actual company needs are. And then pattern matching, I think that's an interesting one. And again, that our data connection, I think, kind of connects us on that pattern matching piece. And I think what's interesting about pattern matching isn't that a lot of autistic people are good at it, but the way that we approach it tends to be very, very different than the way that neurotypicals approach matching patterns. Most neurotypicals will compare detail to detail. I mean, they'll look, this sheet and they'll look at this sheet. That's back and forth, detail after detail. Well, that's not how I do it. And I know, Ed, we've chatted previously, I know that's not how you do it either. We just kind of have a picture in our mind. We're able to kind of visualize. And what that visualization looks like, I don't know, can look different for each one of us. But suddenly when we see something that is just out of the pattern, it just doesn't fit, it jumps right out of us. It's kind of like, having a picture of a parking lot full of automobiles, but suddenly there's a ship sitting in the middle. It's just obviously wrong. It just doesn't fit in. And I didn't have to look at every detail to figure that out. So again, that's a phenomenal, great skill to be able to bring to a workplace when you're doing something like you are, that's so critical to make sure everything's right, of analyzing and making sure data is correct. And for those in the data field, we all know that getting correct data is, the nemesis of being in the data field. So this is really a great skill to have. Overall, I would say what employers really need to understand about the autistic neurodistinct person is, just because they think differently and may state ideas and communicate differently doesn't mean that they're wrong. So thanks again, Ed, for sharing. And, it's wonderful that Astra Zeneca has given you a place where you can be the real, true you and not have to mask, as is so common in so many places.